Chapter 5. Not much of a town, Liz thought as the tow truck approached Stonewall. They traveled along Main Street, which looked like a smaller version of the small New Mexico main streets she had seen in little towns near her home. Maybe less of a Mexican influence in the architecture, but the same basic rundown appearance. Maria made a face that said, "We left Roswell for this?" Liz saw a place called Bell's Diner and said, "Could you drop us here?" Gomer brought the truck to a stop and said, "Johnny's garage is at the end of the street." "We'll come by when the guys get here," Liz said, as Isabel and Maria hopped out of the truck. "Thank you," she added as she jumped out last. "It's not the crash down," Isabel said, giving the storefront an appraising stare. It certainly was not, Liz had to agree. The paint in the front was cracked and peeling. "Hey, Liz, look, opportunity," Maria said, pointing to a help wanted sign taped to the inside of the window. Liz smiled at Maria. One thing was certain. They hadn't left Roswell to become waitresses again. Not in a place like this. Reaching for the door, Liz was stopped by another sign. This one was written in a childish scrawl and read, "Have you seen my sister?" Then there was a photocopied picture of a teenage girl and a phone number. Liz felt a chill as she looked at a yearbook picture of a girl about her own age. Maria and Isabel gently nudged her into the diner. As they stepped inside, Liz saw ancient linoleum on the floor and some well-worn tables and booths. Her parents' restaurant, the Crash Down, was fancy by comparison. Whoever ran Bell's Diner was not particularly meticulous. On the other hand, Liz was sure there was less money going around in Stonewall than in Roswell. "Sit wherever you like," an older woman with graying hair was pouring coffee behind the counter. Though she wasn't wearing a uniform, Liz assumed she was a waitress. Liz chose a booth by the window where they could see Main Street. That way they could see when the guys showed up. Maria threw herself into the booth and said, "I am starving." The waitress dropped menus off without a word. Maria and Isabel immediately opened theirs, but Liz waited a moment. "Maybe we should wait for the guys." "Liz," Maria said, "starving won't help them. Trust me, Max would want you to eat." Liz thought about it for a moment. Maria was probably right. Still, the waitress arrived, interrupting her thought. Without hesitation, Isabel looked up and said, "I'll have a cheeseburger deluxe and Coke." Well, that settles it, Liz thought. The faded and chipped sign read, "Welcome to Stonewall." "See, they said welcome. They must be friendly," Michael said. Kyle stumbled, and Max immediately held out his hand to grasp his arm. "Are you okay? Do you want to take a break?" Though it was just about 80 degrees out, the sun had been blasting them for the whole trip. And because of Michael's pushing, they had not stopped once. "Football has conditioned my body," Kyle said, "and walking Buddha's middle way has conditioned my spirit." "What the hell does that mean?" Michael asked, making a face. "I'm good," Kyle said. They approached the town, and Max felt the beginnings of relief. He would even feel even better when they had the van fixed and were back on the road. The farther they traveled from Roswell, the harder they would be to track. They passed a laundromat, which was the first store on Main Street. There were 3 women outside who stared at the boys as they came closer. "Look, some of Stonewall's friendly citizens," Michael said. Then he raised his hand and waved to the women. "Afternoon," he said as the strangers quickly looked away. "Michael," Max said softly, "we are trying to avoid attracting attention." "Maxwell, I think the arrival of the morning paper attracts attention in this town. I get the feeling we're at the most excitement they've seen in years." Michael was right. Max knew. The main street was nearly empty of people. As strangers in such a small town, they couldn't help attracting attention. But that didn't mean they had to go out of their way to alert people to their presence. Up ahead, they saw a sign for Bell's Diner. "There we are," Michael said, pointing to the sign. Let's go eat," Michael said. "Wait," Max said. "I'll feel better when we have money in our pockets. And it wouldn't hurt to make sure the garage has gotten started on the van." "Max, we left aliens and conspiracies hundreds of miles back there," Kyle said, pointing back the way they had come. "You can relax a little. We all can." That was it, Max realized. Kyle was relaxing. Max wasn't there yet, and for a moment he wondered if he would ever be. But he was done taking charge of every situation. "Okay, but let's stop and turn this into cash," Max said, patting the pocket that held the gold. "And how are we going to do that in this town?" Kyle said. "We're going to have to if we want to get the van fixed and get out of here," Max said. "There you go, Maxwell," Michael said, pointing out a storefront that said simply, "Pawn." Max nodded. "We won't get the best price here, but it doesn't look like the town has a jewelry store." Actually, a pawn shop was the perfect place to sell their gold. From what he understood, pawn shops operated on just this side of the law, often dealing in stolen merchandise. There would likely be fewer questions here than anywhere else. Of course, everything he knew about pawn shops came from television and the movies, he realized as the 3 boys headed for the door. Taped to the outside was a homemade flyer that said "Missing" and had a photocopied picture of an adult woman. Max didn't stop to read the flyer. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. To his surprise, the shop looked just like what he had imagined. Stereo equipment and musical instruments sat on shelves in the walls. Jewelry sat in a glass case near the counter. A white-haired older man with at least 4 days' worth of whiskers on his face sat behind the counter smoking a cigar. He had looked up from his paper when the boys walked in and was eyeing them with the same suspicious glance they had now seen 3 times from people in Stonewall. The man didn't say anything as the boys stepped forward. Max wasn't sure how to begin. Kyle broke the silence. "We were just a few miles down the road and our van broke down," he said, "and you're in the wrong place," the man said, finally speaking. "The wrong place," Max said. "Johnny's garage is down the street," the man said. "I can't help you with your van." Max shook his head and held out the gold. "We'd like to sell these to pay the garage for the repairs," he said, putting the 2 bars down on the counter. The gold got the man's attention. He was looking at them with interest. "Where'd you get these?" he asked. "My father got them overseas," Max said, determined to keep his story short. The man nodded and seemed satisfied. He picked up the bars, testing their weight. "I can't give you market value, you know. This is a pawn shop. You'll have to go to Pueblo if you want anywhere near market price," he said. "What can you give us?" Max said. The man sized the 3 boys up and said, "Let's see what you've got here." He reached under the counter and came up with a bottle and a small glass jar. "Do you know the carat count?" he asked. "I don't know," Max said honestly. He knew that gold's purity was measured in carats, but he wasn't sure how his homemade gold would measure. "It's pure as far as I know," he said. The man dipped the brush into the bottle and ran it across the surface of one of the bars. "Well, it's pure all right. Pure garbage," he said as he sneered and passed the bars back to Max. "What do you mean?" Max asked. "I mean, whatever they are not gold," the man said. "There must be a mistake," Max said. "Yeah, and you made it, coming in here and trying to pass off your phony crap on me," the man replied. The man stood up and gave the 3 boys a menacing look. "Now, we can do this 2 ways. You can either get the hell out of my store or we can let the police handle this." "No need to get nasty," Michael said from behind Max. Looking into the man's eyes, Max realized that the older man was scared. It made sense. 3 teenagers in a town that didn't normally get visitors. Backing away, he said, "No need for that. I'm sorry. This was a mistake. If I see you again, I'll call the police," the man said. Turning to Michael and Kyle, he saw the look on Michael's face and thought the man might be right to be scared. Michael did not respond well to threats. On the other hand, Max knew that his best friend was too smart to do something that would get them into trouble. Shaking his head, he said to his friends, "Come on, let's go." A moment later, they were on the sidewalk outside. Max felt like he had just had the wind knocked out of him. They had narrowly avoided a run-in with the police. They were far from okay. Michael started pacing back and forth on the sidewalk, while Kyle wore the same stunned expression that Max knew he was on his own face. What was he going to tell Liz and the others? And how were they going to get out of Stonewall with just a few dollars to their name? "We're in trouble," he thought. It took him a moment to realize that he had spoken out loud. Chapter 6. "Cutie's looking over here again," Maria said, pointing to the busboy. Liz nodded. He had been looking at them since shortly after the girls sat down. In between clearing the tables of dishes, he had stolen glances at the girls for more than an hour and a half now. "He looks impaired," Maria said. "He has Down syndrome," Isabel said. The other 2 girls looked at Isabel questioningly. "I used to volunteer at school," Isabel said. Maria looked at Isabel with surprise. Liz knew how she felt. Isabel didn't seem on the surface to be the type to volunteer to work with handicapped kids. Then again, she didn't seem like the kind of person to embrace Christmas like Mrs. Claus on a triple latte, but she did that too. "Down what?" Maria asked. "He has an extra chromosome," Liz said. She knew that much. Isabel nodded. "And that causes some impairment," she said. "But people with the condition can function very well." Liz watched the boy work. "He's probably lonely," Liz said. Isabel and Maria nodded. Liz smiled absently at him and turned back to her friends. Isabel was checking her watch. "The boys should have been here already," she said. "Let's give them a few more minutes before we go looking for them," Maria said. "Okay," Liz agreed. They couldn't stay in the diner forever, and although it wasn't exactly full, they couldn't take up the table all day. The dinner rush, whatever passed for a dinner rush in Stonewall, would be starting soon. "Excuse me," a voice said from next to Liz. She turned to see the boy who had been looking at them. "Excuse me," he repeated in a slow, deliberate tone. Then the boy thrust a piece of paper toward the girls. "Have you seen my sister?" he asked. Looking down, Liz could see the paper was similar to the flyer that was posted on the door. It had the same picture of a teenage girl and read, "Have you seen my sister?" with a phone number on the bottom. "Have you seen her?" he asked again. His voice was friendly, but there was a worried edge to it. "No, I'm sorry, we haven't," Isabel said. "Jimmy, stop bothering the customers," the woman who had served them shouted from behind the counter. "It's okay," Liz said. "He's not bothering us." The woman shrugged and said, "Come on, Jimmy, I need you to take out the garbage." Before he turned away, Liz reached out her hand, touched him gently on the arm, and said, "Has she been gone long?" "She's missing," he said. then looked at Liz with a surprise and said very clearly, "You saw her?" Liz shook her head gently. "No, I saw her picture on the door, but I haven't seen her." Shaking his head, Jimmy looked confused. The clarity that was on his face a moment ago now gone. "I remembered you," he said uncertainly. "I'm sorry," Liz said. "Okay," Jimmy said as he walked away. "We'll call you if we see her," Isabel said as Jimmy headed into the kitchen. A few minutes later, Liz saw Max, Michael, and Kyle approach on the sidewalk. She caught just a glimpse of them before they reached the door. "There's something wrong," she said. "Another flash, Parker?" Maria asked. "No, I just saw Max," she said. Then the boys were inside, and Liz saw their three long faces. She could also see the boys were tired after spending an hour and a half walking from the car. Max reached the table first. "We have a problem," he said. "Sit down, Max. We'll get you something to eat and figure it out," Liz said. "We can't eat," Max said. Michael and Kyle frowned when he said that. "Let's just talk about this outside."
After the boys had told their story, Maria asked, "So how much money do we have?"
Liz didn't have to check to answer that. They had spent almost $20 at the diner. $42.40, she said. Then she watched Maria give Michael a smack on the shoulder. "Why didn't your stupid alien powers work?" "Who knows?" Michael replied. "Something must be wrong," Max said with a grave expression on his face. No, Liz said, "nothing's wrong." All eyes turned to her and she said, "I should have thought of this." "What?" Max asked. "There's no way you can use your powers to make gold," she said. The others continued to look at her with confused expressions. "Look," she continued, "you can use your powers to change the molecular structure of things. You actually move molecules around, right?" she said. "Yes," Max said, realization dawning on his face. "Molecules." Liz nodded, and Michael jumped in. What? What about them? Would Mr. and Mrs. Wizard mind explaining this to the audience at home?" he said. "Gold is not gold because of its molecular structure," she said. "Gold is gold because of its atomic weight. And we can make something look like gold, but it won't actually be gold," Max said. "But Max made you that diamond," Maria said. Liz nodded. It was beautiful and still in her pocket. She and Max had meant to get a setting for it, but had run out of time. "He made it out of charcoal. Both coal and diamonds are different forms of carbon. They're identical on the atomic level," she said. Michael nodded and said in a reasonable tone, "Wait, then what you're saying is that because of the way our powers work, we're completely screwed and broke?" "Well, yeah," Liz said. "Why not make some more diamonds, Max?" Maria asked. "The only place to sell them in this town would be the pawn shop, and the owner will call the police if we step inside again. And with no transportation, we can't get to the next town," Max said. "So what now? We're hundreds of miles from home. We can't use a cell phone or, God forbid, an ATM. The van is busted. We'll be lucky if we have enough money for a motel room for the night. If we don't spend anything else," Max said. "Wait a minute. What about food?" "Buddha's middle way requires that I avoid extremes of self-denial," Kyle said. That's right. The boys haven't eaten, Liz thought. Suddenly, Liz felt guilty about the food she and Isabel and Maria had eaten and the money they had spent. "There has to be something we can do to make some money," Maria said. "We could use our powers to rob a bank," Michael said. All the others shot him a look, and he put his hands up and said, "Kidding." "Max," Liz said. He shrugged. "I don't have any answers here," he said. Kyle stepped forward and said, "It's obvious then." "What?" Maria asked. "We'll have to get jobs to make enough money to fix the van and get out of town," Kyle said. "In the meantime, we'll have to pay for food and a place to sleep," Liz added. "Looks like we don't have a choice," Max said. "You guys have to eat," Liz said. "We have to figure something out." Max nodded and said, "After we have a room for the night, we'll see how much we have left." Michael and Kyle seemed relieved to hear that. "But first, we need to stop by the garage, make sure they've started on the van." Liz nodded and pointed down the street in the direction of the garage. "Gomer said it's Johnny's garage, and it's down the street," she said. "We'll split up. Michael, Kyle, and I will see about the van, see if we can find a room and any work," Max said. "We can start job hunting in the meantime," Liz said. "We better hurry. It's getting up close to 5. People are going to start closing up. I don't think this town has much in the way of nightlife," Maria said. As they approached the garage, Kyle said, "Let me do the talking." Max twitched in surprise, but didn't say anything. It took an effort for him not to take charge, Kyle realized. "Garage mechanic powers, boys," he said. "Of course," Max said. "Yeah, we're just more human alien hybrids with the ability to transform matter and control incredible energies," Michael said. Johnny's garage was at least 100 yards past the last store on Main Street, an ancient laundromat. The garage looked just as ancient. It was basically a large barn with sheds jutting haphazardly from the sides. A pair of gas pumps sat in front. A number of equally old cars were scattered around the place. The small office was empty, so Kyle led the way into the barn itself. There were 4 repair bays, 3 of which were currently occupied by cars that were nearly his age and looked it. The first bay contained a car over 30 years old. It was a 1968 Thunderbird in mint condition. The hood was down, and Kyle was certain the owner's car and had obviously been cared for very well. Kyle racked his brain for information on that car. It might come in handy. The shop itself was surprisingly well kept, at least compared with the outside. He had been expecting the place to be littered with junk. Both tools and car parts were all pretty much in their place. And though Johnny's garage lacked some of the computerized diagnostic equipment that Kyle had taken for granted back in Roswell, he doubted that equipment would be necessary in this town, considering the age of the cars he had seen here. The other remarkable thing about the shop was that it seemed to be empty of people. Hello, Kyle called as they walked toward the back of the barn. After he repeated himself 2 more times, someone appeared from under the car, in the last bay. Kyle immediately saw that he was older than Kyle's own father, perhaps by 10 years or more. Tall and wiry, the man had hair so gray it was almost white. It was also long and tied back in a ponytail. Like virtually everyone they had seen so far in Stonewall, the man eyed them suspiciously. Hi, Kyle said. The man nodded. Is this your place? Kyle asked. Yep,
the man said. So you're Johnny, Kyle said, giving the man a friendly smile.
He shook his head and said simply, nope, offering no further explanation. Kyle didn't press the issue. That your T-Bird? Kyle said. Yep, the man said. It's nice. You don't see a lot of them on the road, Kyle said, keeping his voice friendly even as he felt the tension from Michael behind him. Who had taught patience, but Michael was no Buddhist. The man didn't reply. Seeing that he wasn't getting anywhere with small talk, Kyle decided to get to business. Gomer towed our van, Kyle said, gesturing to the van in the second repair bay. Won't start, the man said. Have you opened it up yet? Kyle asked. Nope, the man replied. Well, I saw that 2 pistons were out, plus the timing chain and a starter, Kyle said. The man's expression changed slightly, and for a moment he looked at Kyle with a flicker of respect. The man approached the van and said, Guess it's pretty well busted. Can you fix it? Kyle asked. Yep, the man said, but parts will be a problem. The man circled the van, looking at it with mild interest now. Gomer said you had a junked VW van. Maybe we could work something out, Kyle said. Maybe we could, the man said. Then he shifted his attention to the boys and said, before we get into a long discussion here, tell me if you have the money for this. Looking down, Kyle realized they were a mess after driving through the night and walking for 2 hours. He didn't blame the man for asking. The 3 of them didn't look like they had the money for lunch, much less for expensive repairs on the classic car. More importantly, they actually didn't have the money. Kyle realized that they should have concocted a better story. Of course, they had expected to have money from Max's gold. Now they were broke, and Kyle didn't want to admit it, but he didn't see that he had much choice. See, that's the thing, Kyle said. We don't have the money right now, but the man was already turning away from them and heading back to the car he'd been working on. Wait, Kyle said, following him as the man leaned down under the open hood to look at the engine. Look, come back when you've got some money, the man said, not looking up. Well, I was wondering if you need any help around here, Kyle said. Kyle caught himself. He almost said Roswell. Down south, he said finally. Don't need any help, the man said. Look, you're backed up and you're here by yourself, Kyle said. The man shook his head and was about to speak when Kyle added, and you'll be here all night if you think replacing that fuel pump will make a difference. Kyle pointed to the old fuel pump on the ground next to the car the man was working on. The new one he had no doubt intended to put in was sitting right next to it. What? The man said. Your problem is with the fuel line, Kyle said. The man looked at him with surprise. Kyle hoped he had not offended him. He had also hoped he was right. Ducking his head into the engine compartment, the man reached down for a moment and pulled his hand back up. Kyle could see that his fingers were wet with gas. The man looked at him in genuine surprise and said, long crack in the fuel line, like you said. How did you know that? In these big old 8-cylinder Chevys, more often than not, it's an old fuel line. That's the trouble. Look, I really know what I'm doing, Kyle said. The man stood up and studied Kyle for a moment. We don't get a lot of strangers here, and they make people in Stonewall nervous, he said. Well, why? Kyle asked. The man shrugged and said, there's been some trouble. He didn't elaborate, and Kyle decided not to push it. Be here at 7 tomorrow morning. If you know what you're doing, I'll give you a chance. $7 an hour. 7? Kyle said, unable to keep the surprise out of his voice. He had made almost twice that at home. This isn't down south, son, in case you haven't noticed. Anyway, you look like you need a job, and I don't need the help that badly, the man said. Okay, Kyle said. Then again, an idea struck him, and he pointed back at Max and said, my friend here knows body work. He's got great hands if you need that kind of thing. Kyle turned to get Max's attention, but it wasn't necessary. Max kept his face neutral and nodded, going along with whatever Kyle was doing. The man waved at him off and said, let's see if you can hold a wrench first, then we'll see about your friend. Kyle held out his hand and said, I'm Kyle, by the way. The man hesitated and then finally shook Kyle's hand. Dan. I'll see you at 7, Dan, Kyle said. Dan didn't respond. He simply turned and went back to work on the car. As Kyle and his friend stepped back outside, Max said, "Nice work." Michael added, "Yeah, one of us has a job." Kyle couldn't help but smile. Then he said, "True, but at $7 an hour, it'll take me a couple months to pay for the repairs." "Michael and I will find something. Maybe the girls will too," Max said. Then he added, "You do realize that I've never done body work in my life." "Yes, but you can reorganize matter at the molecular level," Kyle said. "I'm sure your powers will work fine when it comes to banging out dents." Kyle realized as he spoke that he had done something that Max and Michael hadn't been able to do with their remarkable powers. He had done something that would help himself and his friends. On the way back into town, Kyle found that he could barely keep the smile from his face.
Chapter 7. "You're kidding," Maria said finally. "Anything but that." "We tried everything else," Liz said. "Despite appearances, this town does not seem to be a powerhouse of opportunity," Isabel said. "Take it from me, the new relief person at the laundromat." Before Maria could respond, Liz said, "Come on," and reached for the door of the diner. She stopped for a moment when she saw Jimmy's flyer about his missing sister. They had seen 3 more missing notices at other places in town, all for young women. A moment later, they were inside again. Jimmy was clearing the table and looked up immediately and met Liz's eyes. She saw the question on his face, but she had no answers for him. "I wish I knew where she was," Liz thought as she gave Jimmy a thin smile. Inside it was dinner time, and Liz was surprised to see the place was 2/3 full. The same woman was there, running from table to table. There was another waitress, also in street clothes, who was helping her. By the way she carried herself, Liz could tell that she had little or no waitressing experience. She was fumbling around, clearly overwhelmed. Both women were. "They're in the weeds," Maria said, shaking her head in sympathy. "Yeah," Liz said. That was the term they used for completely drowning at their waitressing stations. There was no cure for it. You just had to struggle through until things got sorted out and business slowed down. As Isabel found a table, Liz and Maria waited at the counter and caught the woman in charge as she headed for the kitchen. "Excuse me," Liz said. The woman turned to her and said in a short voice, "Yes?" Liz spoke quickly and said, "We saw the help wanted sign and we're looking for work." The woman looked over them quickly. Liz saw a flash of recognition in her eyes and realized that she remembered them from earlier. "You have experience?" she said. "Yes," Maria and Liz said together. "Tons," Liz added. Without thinking, the woman said, "If you're here at 6:30 tomorrow, you're hired." Then she was gone. "We have jobs," Liz said, immediately feeling relief. "Is that the good news or the bad news?" Maria asked, frowning. The 2 girls joined Isabel at the table just as Max, Michael, and Kyle arrived in the diner. Max smiled at Liz as the boys crowded into the booth. "How did you guys do?" Liz asked. "Well, the garage won't start on the van until we have some money, but Kyle got a job there," Max replied. Liz saw the pride on Kyle's face and understood it. "What about you 2? Maria asked. Michael shook his head. "Nothing. I came close to the laundromat, but a tall girl with blonde hair beat me to a coveted relief attendant job," he said as he shot Isabel a look. "It's okay. Maria and I will be working here tomorrow," Liz said. "We'll be out of here before we know it. How much will the repairs cost, Kyle?" "If we were paying for them, could be as much as 1,000, Kyle said. There were sharp intakes of breath around the table. Kyle lifted his hand and said, "But I'm hoping that the boss will let me do the work after hours, so then it would be just the parts, just a few hundred. Even so, it could be weeks before we earn that here, after we pay for food and somewhere to sleep," Max said. "Did you guys find a place?" Liz said. Max nodded. "There's a motel just outside of town. A room is $40 a night," he said. "Just about everything we have," Maria said. Liz quickly did the math in her head. "It would leave us with less than $3, she said. She shook her head. "We're not doing it. We'll sleep in the van tonight." "What?" Maria said. "If we spend the money on a room, you guys will have nothing to eat, and we'll have nothing tomorrow," Liz said. "We'll be okay," Max said. "We can get a room." Michael looked over at Max in surprise. "No," Liz said before Michael could respond. "Tell you what, Max," Liz said. "Let's put it to a vote." "Out of the question," Max said. "If you remember, you made it clear that you don't want to make all the decisions," Liz said, smiling. She turned to the group. "All in favor of getting the boys some food?" Liz put her hand up, followed by Isabel, then Michael, Kyle, and finally Maria. "That's the problem with democracy. Not everybody gets what they want," Liz said. Waving over the waitress, Liz watched the guys order. After the boys had finished, Liz realized she was tired. By the look of them, so was the rest of the group. Checking her watch, she saw it was almost 6:30. We can't hang around here all night, Liz said. Yeah, we'll see enough of this place tomorrow, Maria said. We should head back to the van, Max said. He turned to Kyle and asked, do you think it's safe? I didn't notice when they closed. 5:30, Kyle said. If the sign was right, we should be okay. The group moved down the street, still attracting the interest of the few people who were on the street. There were very few people, Liz noticed, even for a sleepy little town. And no one seemed to be sitting outside anywhere, either on a porch or in front of a store. Instead, everyone she saw was either coming or going. No one was staying still or even lingering outside. Thus, they were able to make their way down Main Street without attracting too much attention. There, Kyle said, pointing to a large barn just past the laundromat. When they got closer, Liz could see the Johnny's Garage sign. Fortunately, the place looked empty and locked up. I don't think anyone's here, Kyle said. Good, Max said. The group made its way to the far side of the barn, where their van was parked among a bunch of old cars that didn't look like it had been running any time recently. And it doesn't look like they will be going anywhere anytime soon, Liz thought. Unfortunately, their van seemed to fit in right in among them. Max tried the door, which was locked. In fact, all the doors were locked. Dan has the only key, Kyle said. No problem, Max said, as he placed his hand over the lock on the driver's side door. There was a click from the inside, and Max opened the door. Alien powers unleashed, Max said flatly, though Liz could hear the hint of humor in his voice. Less than a minute later, the group was all in their seats. It was just starting to get dark out, but already Liz felt like she had sandpaper on her lids. She hadn't had much sleep in the last 2 days, but even so, she knew she had no more than Max, who hadn't slept at all the night before. Looking outside, Max said, we should be warm enough. He was right. It was still in the 70s outside. It was comfortable in the van. If they would be sleeping in the van a lot in the coming months, Liz made a note to remember that they should not wander into cold climates as they got closer to the fall. Liz heard a smacking sound, then Michael said, ow. That made Liz smile. If Maria and Michael hadn't figured out their relationship yet, they would have plenty of time on this trip. As her eyes closed, she felt Max's lips on hers. Good night, Liz, he said. Good night, Max, Liz said, smiling. She opened her eyes for a moment to see Max watching her, then she stopped fighting it. At the end of the first day of her new life, Liz Parker fell into a deep and dreamless sleep. Max woke instantly to the sound of a flashlight tapping near his head. Before he even remembered where he was, he lifted his right hand in defense. Then his eyes met the eyes of the man who owned the garage. His name is Dan, Max's brain supplied. Forcing himself to relax, Max lowered his hand and then opened the window on his door. Camping out? Dan said, his face unreadable. I hope it's okay, Max said. Dan glanced inside the van and took in the other 5 teenagers who were slowly waking up. He shrugged and said, there's a motel up the street. We know, Max said, but... Dan waved off the explanation, and then he studied the group. For a moment, something passed over his face. Then he was unreadable again and said, Kyle, am I going to see you in 45 minutes? Yes, sir, Kyle said. Then Dan was turning away, heading back to the barn. Max got up to stretch his legs. As soon as he was on the ground, Dan turned and, pointing to what looked like a small shed that had been added to the side of the barn, said, there's a studio with a shower. I'll bring you some towels, Dan said. Thank you, Kyle said. Dan didn't respond. Instead, he simply walked off. The girls have to go to work first, Maria said. She grabbed Liz by the hand. Isabel followed. Before they got there, Dan had appeared with a stack of towels, which he handed to Isabel. Then the girls disappeared into the door to the building. Half an hour later, the girls came out dressed and with their hair wet. Their clothes also looked freshly cleaned. Max realized that Isabel must have used her powers for that. Well, it's not gold bars, he thought, but at least their powers are good for something. None of them had so much as a change of clothes, and even if they had the money, buying more would create a storage problem in the van. With 6 people taking up most of the available space, there wouldn't be much room for clothes or possessions of any kind. Well, at least their powers would save them from having to do laundry. When the guys approached, Liz said, he left a pot of oatmeal on the hot plate inside. There's plenty. Max was surprised. Dan had given a strange teenager a job, then the shower facilities. Though Dan was gruff, he'd given them the first real help of their trip. Maybe things were looking up in Stonewall after all. As soon as the thought formed in his mind, Max tried it himself. They couldn't afford to get too comfortable anywhere, not until they had put a lot more distance between themselves and Roswell. Liz leaned into him. He kissed her, and she said, bye, honey, I'm off to work. Max smiled. Be careful, I don't like the look of the missing person signs. Under normal circumstances, Liz would casually brush off one of his warnings. This time she became thoughtful. In fact, the whole group went still. Max knew why. They had all seen the signs, but no one had said anything out loud yet. They had all seen missing signs before. In Roswell and in the larger cities they had visited, but there were too many signs for a town this size. Then there was the air of what? Tension? Fear? Okay, Liz said. Max, Kyle, and Michael watched the girls go, then headed for the room. Stepping inside the door, Max took in the small studio apartment. Well, apartment was a strong term for the place. It was one room with a double bed, an old kitchen chair, two beanbag chairs held together with duct tape, and a tiny sink with a hot plate next to it. On the floor was a low shelf that held some old toys, robots and dinosaurs, and a small television with a coat hanger for an antenna. The walls were covered with rock and roll posters that Max recognized from the 1960s. In fact, the room didn't look like it had been used much since then. It was clean, but Max couldn't shake the feeling that he was inside a time capsule. To the right was an open door that Max could see led to the small bathroom, which had a stall shower. You first, Michael said. You're the working man. Kyle disappeared into the bathroom, and Michael sat down heavily on the bed. What now, Maxwell? He said. You stay here and keep a low profile, Max said. But we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of things to do in this town, Michael joked. Actually, Michael, I think we've seen it all, Max replied. I think you're right, Michael said, smiling. Leaning down, Max tried the television. To his surprise, it hummed when he turned it on. For a moment, he smelled something that smelled like burning dust. Then a picture flashed on. It was black and white, which made sense. The set was old and had dials instead of buttons. Getting nothing but static, Max tried every channel on the dial. He found two stations that seemed to work. Cable must be out, Michael said dryly. Max improved the reception by playing with the coat hanger. I vote for cartoons, Michael said. News, Max said. I want to see if anyone's looking for us. Waiting for special bulletin telling people to be on the lookout for 3 alien-human hybrids, Michael said. Something more subtle, Max said. There was a talk show on one of the channels and a game show on the other. It might be a while. Then something on the shelf under the television caught his eye. He picked up the pack of cards and started counting. How many? Michael asked. 52, Max replied. Things are finally looking up. Chapter 8. When they stepped into the diner, Jimmy was already there and watching the door as if he had been waiting for them. By the time they got to the counter, the owner appeared and said, I wasn't sure you girls were coming, but I'm glad you did. I'm Belle, she said, extending her hand. Liz shook first. I'm Liz. Maria followed. I'm Maria. And you really have done this before? Belle asked. Yes, the girls said together. Well, at this point, it wouldn't matter much if you hadn't. I really need your help, Belle said. Liz noticed that Belle was friendlier and more relaxed than yesterday. Maybe the prospect of some help had cheered her up. We have to be honest with you, Liz said. We won't be staying long in Stonewall. Liz felt Maria's elbow stick her in her ribs, but she did not want to mislead this woman. Creating bad feelings would just raise their profile in town. We're in town with our friends and we're trying to earn enough money to fix our van, she continued. Your van at Johnny's? The woman asked. And we have a friend who's working there, Liz said. She wasn't really giving anything away. Liz knew that in a small town, keeping secrets was nearly impossible. Belle nodded. Okay, thanks for telling me. For as long as you can stay, I'm sure you'll be better than my sister-in-law. She's a better wife to my brother than she is a waitress, and she's a terrible wife. Both Liz and Maria smiled at that. Come on, Belle said, leading them into the kitchen. She pointed to a thin, middle-aged man and said, This is my husband, Sam. Sam, these are the new girls, Liz and Maria. Nice to meet you, Liz said. Sam nodded and went back to cleaning the grill surface. Sam doesn't say much, Belle said, as they went back outside. It's the secret of our successful marriage. If Sam needs help, my boyfriend cooks short order, Maria offered. Belle shook her head and said, Sam's okay on his own, but thanks. Look, girls, if you are going to be short-timing it, why don't we settle up at the end of each day? Great, thanks, Liz said, glad that she decided to tell Belle the truth. You eat free while you're here, Belle said. Your friends can eat. How many of them are there? 4 more, Liz said. Belle nodded and said, they'll get a discount. We've got 20 minutes until we open. Why don't you find uniforms and aprons in the back? You can't miss the bathroom. I saw that you met Jimmy yesterday. Let me know if he's bothering you. No, he's fine, Liz said. Belle nodded. He's had a tough time. His sister Jessica used to work here. Belle studied them for a moment and added, she's missing. We saw the sign, Maria said. In fact, we saw more than one. Belle nodded again. There's been some trouble. You'll notice that people stay off the street. You girls stay together when you go out. Or better yet, have your boyfriends come get you. What do the police say? Liz asked. They don't know anything, and the sheriff's gone. We don't have a replacement yet. Just be careful, Belle said. Liz and Maria headed into the back. A few minutes later, they came out in uniforms. Liz found one that fit a bit tightly but was comfortable enough. Looking at the clock, she saw that they had about 15 minutes before they opened. Is there any side work to do? She asked Belle. Belle smiled. You have done this before. Yes, why don't you two fill the sugars and marry the ketchups? Then put a clean silverware in the bins and set the tables. I was too weak to do it all last night. While Liz was filling sugars, Jimmy approached her and said, That's my sister's uniform. Oh, I'm sorry, I can find another one, Liz said. Jimmy shook his head. That's okay. She doesn't need it right now. I'm sorry about your sister, Jimmy, Liz said. Me too, he said. Then he looked surprised and said, Don't worry about it. I spill stuff all the time. Spill? Liz said, but Jimmy just shrugged. When she turned, she swiped the sugar container she had been filling with her hand. It spilled across the counter. Jimmy, how did... Liz began, but Jimmy had already turned for the kitchen. How did Jimmy know that I was going to spill something? Liz wondered. Further musings were cut short when Belle went to the front door and turned the sign around so that the open sign faced front. There was people waiting outside already. A moment later, they had filtered in and it was time to go to work. War, Michael said, tossing down a card. Max started throwing down cards at the same time. In the end, Michael threw down a jack face up. Max had a 5. Michael took the next 2 rounds and got rid of his last card, leaving Max with 6 cards in his hand. I don't have to count them, Maxwell. That wasn't even close, Michael said, smiling. I don't think you are cut out for war. I was king. You were the one with the advanced military training, Max said, keeping his voice even and his expression neutral. I always knew it would pay off someday, Michael said as he shuffled the cards. My deal, Michael said when he was finished. But before he could deal out the first card, the door opened and Isabel stepped inside. He could see something was wrong by the look on her face. Max was on his feet instantly. What is it? He asked. Isabel sighed. Nothing serious, Max, but it looks like it's so slow today that they don't need a relief laundromat attendee trainee, she said, sitting on the bed. Michael shook his head. Look at us. 3 of the Royal 4 with incredible alien powers at our command, and none of us have a useful skill. If it wasn't for Maria, Liz, and Kyle, we'd be even more trouble than we are now, he said. You mean more trouble than being stranded in a nothing town with no money and a broken down van? We wouldn't have even eaten today if it wasn't for the oatmeal we lucked into, Isabel said. By the time she was done, Isabel's voice was tight. Max decided that he'd waited long enough. He had wanted to do it before, but he didn't want to begin in the van in front of all the others. Now Michael was here, but Max knew he had a responsibility to his sister. Isabel, do you want to talk about it? He asked. She looked at him in surprise for a moment. I think I said it all. Well, I left out the part about sleeping in a van last night. Max shook his head. No, not that. He paused, not sure how to begin. Isabel had always had trouble confiding in him when they were growing up. It had already gotten harder lately. About Jessie, Max said finally. With his peripheral vision, he saw Michael squirm uncomfortably. Isabel gave him a slightly stunned look. For a moment, she was silent. This wasn't just another breakup. You were married, Max said. I know I was married, Isabel exploded. In fact, I still am. It's just that I'm never going to see my husband again. She was angry and immediately went red in the face. Well, angry, even if it was with him, was better than what she could be feeling. I'm sorry, Isabel. I want to help if I can, Max said. Maybe if you talked. That's the problem, Max. You can't help me, Isabel said, her voice tight. You can't fix this. I left my husband and my last chance of escaping all this back in Roswell. Max could see that Isabel was near tears. He hadn't wanted to upset her, and seeing her so vulnerable unsettled him. He had rarely seen her cry, even when they were younger. Listen, Michael said, breaking the silence. What's so great about being normal? We've been trying since we got out of the pods, and it hasn't worked out so well. And Isabel, Jesse was okay, but he wasn't the one. There was dead silence in the room for a long moment. Max found himself holding his breath. Isabel looked shocked as if Michael had just thrown cold water in her face or slapped her. Max could see anger, grief, and something else colliding on her face. For a second, Max wasn't sure if she was going to cry or hit Michael. Both options looked like an even bet. Then, as quickly as the storm of emotions came to seem to pass, Isabel seemed to deflate in front of them. She was holding herself together, barely. Max preferred seeing her angry. Then she leveled a cool gaze at Max and said, No, I don't want to talk about it right now. Isabel got up and seemed on the verge of storming out. Then she turned and sat on the floor next to Max. What are you playing? She asked. War, Michael said, still holding the cards in his hands. She grabbed the cards from him and said, Dealer's choice. As she shuffled the cards, Max took in what had just happened. He still couldn't believe that Michael had spoken up. His best friend usually avoided discussion about feelings with the same intensity that he guarded their big secret. Max was equally surprised by how much sense Michael had made. They had been trying for their whole lives to be normal. It had never worked, and they had all paid a price for the failure. And Max was even more surprised that Michael had said what he had said about Jessie. It was true, Max knew. They had all sensed it, though they had never talked about it. Instead, they had discussed the fact that she was so young and that they were rushing the wedding. But the truth was that they had all known the simple truth that no one had said out loud until Michael did a minute before. Jessie was not the one. Even so, Max had no doubt that Isabel had loved him and that her pain and grief right now were real. Well, maybe she would want to talk about it when a bit more time had passed. If Michael could talk about feelings and make sense doing it, anything was possible. Isabel dealt out the cards. Since he was sitting on her left, he went first. Max looked levelly at Isabel and said, 7. His sister leveled a steely gaze at him and said in an even voice, Go fish, Max. Liz laid 2 plates at the first table in her station, smiled, and immediately headed behind the counter, where the large cutout in the wall led to the kitchen. She nearly collided with Maria, who got there a moment before she did. Where's my omelet and home fries? Maria called out. Sam grunted from inside the kitchen but passed the plate out. Maria took it and was off. For all of her complaining about going back to work as a waitress, Maria had settled right in at Belle's. Liz found that she had as well, though both girls were frustrated by the fact that they didn't know the menu and prices cold. After years at the crash down, they could each recite the menu forward and backward. So they spent a frustrating first hour checking the menu before they added up the checks. But they picked it up quickly, and now, as the breakfast rush began to taper off, Liz could make out most checks from memory, and she could see that Maria was doing the same. Liz was surprised at how much of a rush the breakfast rush had actually been. She wasn't sure the diner would keep even one experienced waitress busy, but they both had been. In the beginning, Belle had been pitching in as well. Once the owner had seen that the girls could handle the crowd, she had concentrated on seating people and working the register. Liz was glad. For one thing, it meant that she and Marie would keep all the tips. And while the checks were smaller than she was used to at the crash down, the running total she kept in her head told her that the tips were averaging a bit higher in percentage. The customers were all working people, local farmers, and factory workers commuting to Pueblo. At home, Liz had learned that working people tip better. Before she had thought that it might only be true in Roswell, but Liz saw that it was true in Stonewall as well. Maybe it's true everywhere, Liz thought. 20 minutes later, Liz watched the last breakfast customer leave. As soon as the door closed, Belle said, Congratulations to both Maria and Liz. Liz found herself smiling and saw that Maria was doing the same. How long did you two say you were going to be in town? Belle asked. Liz shrugged. A week or two, she said. She honestly didn't know how long it would take them to earn enough to get the van fixed and get moving. Well, I'll be sorry to see you go, Belle said. You'll find someone new by then, Liz said. Just then, Jimmy was coming out of the kitchen, and Liz saw his face drop. Liz cursed herself. She walked over to Jimmy and said, I didn't mean it like that. I'm sure she'll be back. Jimmy nodded and went back to work. Then Maria was next to Liz and patting her arm. You girls deserve a break if you want to sit down and have something to eat, Belle said, gesturing to a table. If it's okay, we'd like to order some food to take to our friends before the lunch rush, Liz said. Sure, just tell Sam what you want, Belle said. Then she shouted into the back, Sam, keep the grill hot. She and Maria conferred on the order, and Maria brought it to Sam. As soon as she left, Jimmy was next to Liz. Hi, Jimmy, Liz said. The boy was silent, but Liz could see that he wanted to say something. Finally, he said, They only take girls. What? She said. Then she realized what he was saying. Who takes them, Jimmy? Do you know who took your sister? Jimmy shook his head. Why do they do that? Why do they think they take girls? He asked. Liz felt the weight of what Jimmy was carrying for a moment, and she didn't need any special alien powers to see it. I don't know, Jimmy, was all she could say. Sometimes they come back for after a day or two, and they're okay, mostly, he said. Then he added, Jessica's been gone for a week. Almost instantly, Jimmy was on the verge of tears. Then he was over the verge. Liz reached out with her hand and touched his arm gently. The world shifted around her. She wasn't in the diner anymore. She was in a room, except room wasn't the right word for where she was. Then there was screaming. A girl was screaming. The scene changed, and Liz saw Jimmy standing in a field. No, it wasn't a field. There were buildings, headstones. He was standing in a sea of headstones. Leaning down, he placed a single white carnation in front of one of the stones. Liz didn't just see him. She felt him, felt what he was feeling. She felt the grief in her stomach. It felt like someone was tearing out her insides. Then she was back in the diner, and Jimmy was looking at her with concern. Are you okay, Liz? He asked. Liz shook her head. The images were already receding, but not the knot in her stomach. You remembered something, didn't you? He asked. Remembered, she said. You remember things too, things that haven't happened yet, he said. He said it evenly, matter-of-factly, as if he already knew. Yes, she found herself saying. Do you remember things, Jimmy? Is that how you knew I was going to spill the sugar? He nodded. But I try not to talk about it. It makes people nervous, he said. Did you see Jessica? He asked. No, Liz said quickly, hating the lie to his open and trusting face. Yet it was a kindness she knew. No doubt he had seen that she had remembered something bad. Okay, he said. Jimmy, Sam needs you in the back, Belle said from behind the counter. Okay, Jimmy said, and he was off. Come on, Parker, Maria said from behind her. Liz turned to her friend, and Maria immediately saw something in her face. What is it? Maria asked. Liz shook her head. Nothing, I'm just tired. Liar, Maria said, sitting down and putting the bags of to-go food down on the table. I had another flash, Liz admitted. I'm not even really sure what I saw. Maria's hand reached out for hers. It's okay, really. I'm sure it was nothing. Just spooked me. It's the first one I've had since yesterday. I don't even really know what it was, she said. Her friend eyed her carefully for a moment and said, Come on, we'll deliver this food and walk it off. Liz shook her head. I'd rather just sit down for a few minutes, she said. The truth was that she knew she'd be able to hide from Max even less than she was able to hide from Maria. She didn't want to answer any questions right now. Okay, I'll do it, Maria said. She got up and grabbed the food. Are you sure you're okay? Yeah, Liz said, mustering a smile. When the door closed behind Maria a few seconds later, Liz found out that the knot in her stomach had not subsided a bit. Who was that guy in Greek myths? He was cursed to see the future and be powerless to stop it, she thought. Well, Liz was sure she had seen the future, and she was equally certain that Jimmy's sister was going to die, and soon.